Relationship between attachment trauma and the DSM. Who's heard the DSM's changing? I think everybody has. I'm already getting quite a few emails about presentations for all the changes in the DSM and how the DSM is going to be working very, very differently in the future. Technically, it is working differently now. It has been actually approved for usage at this time. However, most of the insurance companies are not actually recognizing the DSM-5 at this point. We did get a notification about 2 weeks ago from, I believe it was Molina, who said come October, they will be recognizing the DSM-5. I want to talk for a moment about foster care. I've worked very, very closely with the foster care system in San Antonio. I have been doing this for approximately 12 years now, and as noted earlier, I am an expert witness for the court system, and I work with adoptions, I work with pre-removals, lots of legal cases with Child Protective Services. As far as I'm concerned, we have an epidemic in child abuse and neglect going on in the state of Texas. These numbers that are represented here are directly from the Department of Family and Protective Services website. They do maintain these statistics on the website. Anybody can go there and look at these. Many of the cases we are seeing now are due to illegal drug usage. When I first started doing this many years ago, most of the cases did not actually involve a whole lot of drug usage. Now, most of the cases that I see coming through my door involve drugs in some way, shape, or form. Mostly illegal, although alcohol is, of course, an issue as well. In the state of Texas, per month, at any one time, there are approximately 16,457 children in foster care. That's an average. In Bexar County alone, per month, we have approximately 1,804 children. That is 10.88% of all the children in Texas that are in foster care. Those numbers are huge. Abuse, unfortunately, is still very alive in Bexar County and in the state of Texas. Now, this is a statistic I got actually from a CEU course I did a couple of years ago. And so the information is from 2009, but it kind of illustrates the percentages for, or by race, for reported abuse. And this is per 1,000 children, and this is all across the United States. It says African Americans have the highest percentage, 16.1%. Native American, 11.6%. Then Hispanic, 8.7%. And non-Hispanic, 7.8%. And Asian American, 2.0%. Do these statistics surprise anyone? Okay. CS. What was the statistic I read the other day? I think it's approximately 1 million reported cases of abuse in the United States per year. That's reported. When you look in the DSM-5, you will notice some very large changes. One of the large changes is that this new diagnostic category, which I apologize, I double-checked this morning, I misnamed it here, is actually trauma and stressor related disorders. In the DSM-5, they have taken basically attachment disorders, adjustment disorders, and any trauma-related disorders, and they've given them this new category. And there is a new diagnosis which we'll be discussing later. This category includes, but is not necessarily limited to, post-traumatic stress disorder, reactive attachment disorder, disinhibited social engagement disorder, acute stress disorder, and, interestingly, adjustment disorders. Now, when I first read that, I was like, of course, I've been practicing while DSM-4 adjustment disorders have their own category. So I had to really kind of stop and think about that for a moment. But in reality, something has happened in a person's life to create an adjustment problem for them. So it makes a lot of sense to me that adjustment disorders would actually be included in this new diagnostic category. Of course, this does represent a major change from the DSM-4 TR. One of the other big changes, of course, which I'm just going to mention briefly, is autism. I think everybody's already heard the controversy concerning autism, and in particular Asperger's disorder is no longer included in the DSM-5. Autism is, but not Asperger's. Okay, let's get right down to the heart of the big changes concerning trauma. One of the things that you know when you look in the DSM-5 is that the diagnostic criterion, the things we're using to diagnose with, are actually much clearer. The DSM-4 TR has some guidelines that seem pretty clear, but there's a lot of interpretation possibility. With the DSM-5, did anybody track when they were producing the DSM-5, the groups that were formed? They actually put together work groups for each of the diagnostic categories. And they poured through tons of research and got feedback. They actually had the website set up so that anybody who wanted to could actually send feedback in to the APA for consideration for the DSM-5. So a lot of work went into this. For post-traumatic stress disorder, 2 major changes occurred, which I think are very positive changes. One, we now have a distinction for children age 6 and under for their diagnostic criterion, and we now have for 7 through adult. And things are a little bit different. This first thing I have up is about children 6 years of age and younger, and this is criterion A, exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Big change, sexual violence. In one or more of the following ways. Directly experiencing the traumatic event or events, witnessing in person the event or events as it occurred to others, especially primary caregivers. And it says, note, witnessing does not include events that are witnessed only in electronic media, television, movies, or pictures. They're talking about actual life events. Notice they're making this distinction of especially primary caregivers. How many people here work with traumatized children? Okay, so you probably may understand what I mean when I say that even just hearing about something that's happened to a primary caregiver can be very traumatizing for these children. A lot of my kids in my practice have seen tremendous and or heard tremendous amount of domestic violence. Okay, number C here. Learning that the traumatic event or events occurred to close family members or close friends. In cases of actual or threatened death of a family member or friend, the event or events must have been violent or accidental. This is a major change from the DSM-4 TR. Because what it's really saying here is that even a child who has heard about these things, especially if they've been given details, can be traumatized. I actually have a client like this right now. Something horrible happened to one of her significant family members. She did not witness it, but she was 5 when she first presented for therapy. She's 6 now, but she can tell me all the details. I've read the police reports, I've read news articles myself. She can tell me all the details. Why? Because one of her relative caregivers in the past told her all the details. It has traumatized her. D here, experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to adverse details of the traumatic events. First responders collecting human remains, police officers repeatedly exposed to details of child abuse. I wish they had used a more relevant example for children here. However, we're going to talk about complex trauma in just a couple of moments during the presentation, and that will help explain some of this as we go along. But really what they're talking about is, like I said a moment ago, the child who has witnessed extremes of domestic violence, especially physical domestic violence, or they have been repeatedly abused or neglected in and of themselves. Okay, criterion B, presence of one or more of the following intrusion symptoms associated with the traumatic events, beginning with the traumatic event, after the traumatic events occurred. Recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive distressing memories of the traumatic event or events. It says, note, spontaneous intrusive memories may not necessarily appear distressing and may be expressed as play reenactment. How many of you see this in your practice? I see this often in my practice. Does anybody else do sand tray therapy? Okay. I do sand tray therapy, and with sand tray therapy, especially ages 5 and up, I see a lot of reenactment of neglect and abuse in the sand trays. We also very often see and hear of children who engage in reenactment of abusive events. Hey, it's what they saw mom and dad doing. It's got to be okay, right? So they're reliving it. One of the things that I usually first work on with foster parents when they bring the children in is breaking up these old patterns. B, recurrent distressing dreams in which the content and or affect of the dream are related to the traumatic event or events. Note, it may not be possible to ascertain that the frightening content is related to the traumatic event or events. A lot of my children report nightmares, not necessarily about trauma or neglect, although that does occur as well, but they're being chased. Monsters. People are shooting at them. I had a child one time that her recurrent dream was that her family was in an airplane and the plane crashed and she was the only survivor. Lots of dreams about Chucky. Hear this a lot. Chucky, Michael Myers, Freddy. They've been exposed to these types of things, and it adds to their trauma. Well, their traumas come out in the dreams for fears that movie monsters are chasing them or trying to kill them. Dissociation reactions, flashbacks. This is my little addendum here. Trauma reminders. The NCTSN.org, are y'all familiar with that organization, is pushing that we change flashback to trauma reminders. And if you go on there, they have a lot of very good free information. It's free to sign up for their website. They have free seminars, which are usable for your CEUs. They're usually 1-hour teleconferences. And I do actually like the idea of trauma reminder better because a flashback literally could be anything. A trauma reminder is much more specific of what's occurred. Okay, so trauma reminders in which the child feels or acts as if the traumatic event or events were recurring. Such reactions may occur on a continuum, with the most extreme expression being a complete loss of awareness of present surroundings. Such trauma-specific reenactments may occur in play. Once again, I see this often with play therapy with children. D, intense or prolonged psychological distress at exposure to internal cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the traumatic event. And E, marked physiological reactions to reminders of the traumatic event. Stomach aches, headaches. My legs are sore. I do get kids occasionally that they've been spanked along the legs, and the reminder of it is that sometimes you just have phantom pains down there. Criterion C, one or more of the following symptoms representing either persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the traumatic event or negative alterations in cognitions and mood associated with the traumatic event must be present beginning after the event or worsening after the event. One, A, persistent avoidance of stimuli. We just don't want to be around that. We don't want to be spanked. A lot of my kids talk about being spanked frequently and how they don't like it and they don't want it ever to happen again. A lot of my children are very protective of their siblings. If they ever get into a home where their sibling is being spanked, they'll try and protect them. Avoidance of or efforts to avoid people, conversation, or interpersonal situations that arouse recollections of the traumatic event. Some of my children, believe it or not, do not want to hear anything about mom and dad. They don't want to go back to them. And I know that sounds almost antithetical, but it happens. They don't want any reminders of the things that have ever occurred to them. Number B, negative alterations in cognitions. This is a growing field. Of course, we've all heard about neuroscience. Neuroscience has to do with learning primarily. But within the field of psychology and trauma and attachment problems in particular, researchers are starting to take very close attention to cognition. We believe that, in particular, complex trauma and severe trauma and neglect create learning difficulties for children, if not actual cognitive disorders. Often one of the things that we see is also speech disorders. So negative alterations in cognitions, substantially increased frequency of negative emotional states, fear, guilt, sadness, shame, confusion. A lot of my kids think it's their fault. A lot of the parents have actually told them this. It's because you would behave that you're in care. You're in foster care. Markedly diminished interest or participation in significant activities, including constriction of play. For those of you who do play therapy, have you ever had a child come in and has been so severely abused or neglected, you had to teach them how to play? I've had several children like that. Literally do not know how to play. Often in the foster care world, we hear stories like, well, I had toys, but mommy and daddy sold them. Or they were parked in front of the TV as the babysitter. There was no interaction. Socially withdrawn behavior. Don't want to interact with anyone. How many of y'all have seen this? Child comes into your office, sits in the corner and plays by themselves. Getting their attention is a chore. Getting them to play with you is even more of a chore. Persistent reduction in expression of positive emotions. Often we see them, they're sad. I have twins right now, and they've been into my office 4 times, and they're always sad. No matter what they're talking about, they're always anxious, regardless of what they're talking about. Very guarded, very superficial children.